Madam President, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Pro Tem. The councilman says once a senator, always a senator. So since we serve together, this is a great way, I think, to start off the work week, wouldn't you say? So it's great to see everyone. We want to thank, I always get the acronym wrong, help me, CRCD. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, CRCD, for your gracious hosting of today's really monumental presser and event. And I appreciate you very much for allowing us to be in your beautiful space. I am Holly Mitchell. I have the privilege of chairing the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors and the privilege, with a capital P, of representing the residents of the 2nd Supervisorial District. And I'm here today on behalf of my colleagues in the Board of Supervisors, joined by our city leadership and Mr. Umhofer, on behalf of the plaintiffs, to announce that we have collectively reached a settlement in the LA Alliance case. I agree. I'm glad that we have reached a resolution because in reality, no unhoused person benefits until we all coordinate and work together. The settlement is one marker on the epic challenge of our time, which is creating a regional housing system that works for every Angelino. Seeing people living on the streets, in their cars, in recreational vehicles, on couches, is unacceptable. I would argue immoral. And I know that all of my elected colleagues here today at the county and the city share this belief, and we've all been working to strengthen programs and services, leveraging every dollar available and advocating for more. I think it's important to recognize that the county and city have been working together outside of this lawsuit, thanks to our fearless administrative leaders who have led that on our part. Together, we've collaborated on interim housing sites, one example being the city set up the physical structures of a bridge home sites with the county providing the support services. That's how we roll. The county is also providing the supportive services, including intensive case management, special mental health services, substance use services, assessments, and linkages to other services at the city's permanent supportive housing sites as well. This is how the Housing First model works. Appropriate and diverse housing options with appropriate and holistic wraparound services. And before I turn to what the settlement means for our county and the City of LA partnership, let me say thank you to my city partners for their partnership in our coordinated COVID response for outreach and vaccination programs to people experiencing homelessness. That was but one example of how we have come together to work in partnership to improve the lives of city and county residents in the time of crisis. And so I thank them. Given that we've been working together, I know that the question now is, well, what does this settlement mean? So, this settlement calls for additional county resources for a comprehensive suite of services for our unhoused family, friends, and neighbors to help them transition off the streets, and services when they enter shelter and enter permanent supportive housing. When I say comprehensive suite of services, it includes everything from intensive case management, mental health and substance use services, but again, meeting the individual and the family where they are. And so if it's job training they need, family reunification, education, child care, the full complement of the kind of services that the county provides will be made available. The county's contribution for the settlement is $236 million through June of 2027. Of this, the county will dedicate $74 million to expand homeless outreach and mobile engagement. The acronym is HOME. And our MDTs, our multidisciplinary teams, specifically assigned to the City of LA, deployed equitably to highest need areas. and $162 million dedicated for services at permanent supportive housing and interim housing sites built within the city. This financial contribution is in addition to the county's already $532 million in Measure H and state funds the county has committed this fiscal year alone to prevent and address homelessness. Additionally, the county has allocated more than $400 million in ARPA dollars, American Rescue Plan funding, to date for housing and supportive services, again, for people experiencing homelessness. I cannot underscore enough how this adds to our toolkit for stemming the tidal wave of people who are experiencing homelessness and strengthens our collaboration to deploy additional resources which will make a difference again for every Angelino. So thank you again to the press for joining us today, and I now have the pleasure of inviting to the podium the mayor of the great city of Los Angeles, Mayor Eric Garcetti.
Thank you so much. It was good to be with you yesterday in church, to be with you Friday or Thursday at the homeless count. We should just carpool together all the time. And thank you for your great leadership, and thank you for being here. Thank you, too, to my dear friends from the city family that have come here. These are easy press conferences to skip, but neither of them would because of their deep commitment to solving this problem. A lot of politicians run away from homelessness. It's easy to point the fingers to other levels, other people, but some people run to them. So thank you, Council President Martinez, and thank you, Kevin DeLeon, as well, for being here. And I also want to thank the two folks you'll hear from who are the two bureaucrats, but we use B as a positive word in the city and the county. I grew up as part of a county family, then joined the city family, so I'm at ease on both sides of the aisle here. But I want to thank Felicia Davenport and Matt Szabo, who really behind the scenes did so much of the really important work that the direction we gave to make this happen, but the details to actually make it happen only happen when two people trust each other, and I think they deserve a round of applause for their extraordinary work as well. So this agreement today is a great day, not just to start this week, but for us moving forward in the city and county of Los Angeles, putting a game plan on paper how we can continue to march towards our ultimate goal of eliminating homelessness from the streets of our great city. We have seen this past week better news. I certainly would never paint it as good news out there on the streets, but better news that a curve is flattening because of the collective work that we are doing. Just as we did in the pandemic, once we stop the increase and flatten the curve, now is the time to really put all of our forces together to push that curve down, to make sure that we net on the streets of Los Angeles and net in the cars and shelters of LA a decline, a decrease, and one day an elimination of people who are experiencing homelessness. Back in April, the city came together to announce we had reached our own settlement, and it's inspiring to be here just a few months later to do the same with the county, to reach that milestone, and I know how tough it is. It's tough, and so people do it on their own time. That is not an editorial, it is a celebration. And jointly, it's the culmination, really not just of months of work, but years of work and decades of failure, to be clear. But this agreement is a commitment not only to our plaintiffs, but also to our local partners as we continue to find solutions for our unhoused neighbors. More buildings like this, more solutions like the tenfold increase in the outreach teams we see on our streets, the encampments we can see with our own eyes beginning to thin in certain parts of town, but so much more work to be done. This agreement will also be a roadmap, I believe, to help us and our successors be able to move forward where we need to be. In close coordination with county, this only works with county, city, and community together. It only works with community, county, and city together. And we're not going to stop working until this job is done. For many of us, no matter what our title is. Consider in 2013 there were just 11 city-funded outreach workers for a population of tens of thousands of unhoused neighbors. 11. Today there are 10 times that number funded by the city, many more by the county, because we've said it's unacceptable for people we not even know their names on the streets, let alone figure out a plan to get them off. We've not only increased the quantity of outreach workers, we've increased the quality of our engagement and our work. Still got a long way to go, but when we see people in massive encampments like Venice Beach being put into our hotels temporarily and our shelters, but then case managed out of that into permanent housing and into jobs and into mental health care, we're beginning to understand what the overall strategy must be. And over the last 8 years, in partnership with the county in the city of Los Angeles, because the county is the city in the city for all those services and mental health care, and they deserve as much credit, we brought in 130,000 unhoused people. Hear that number, because when people say you're failing, 130,000 people, we've not failed 130,000 people. We have succeeded with them. The problem has been the supply in and that we need to ramp up the pace out. We now have new and innovative interim housing available. When people said build more shelters, maybe 5 or 6, we said we'll do 15, wound up with 28. When people said tiny home villages, we said we'll do them. In fact, the largest in the country is in Kevin De Leon's district. When we said we needed more outreach teams, we figured out a way when we looked at mental health that wouldn't just take police officers and sheriff's deputies and firefighters to mental health crises, but trained county workers. We now have 4 that cover the entire city of Los Angeles that take those 911 calls and over 80% of the time resolve them, as opposed to 2% of the time resolve them and putting people back on the street. So this agreement is part of that news, to provide us with more opportunities to leverage city and county, both what we do best individually and collectively what we can do both best together. Last Thursday, as I said, Chair Mitchell and I stood side to side as we announced the results of the lights going out in this. Somebody leaning against the lights, maybe, someplace? That's usually what happens. But, or maybe we need to move more? Nobody's moving? Oh, anyway. You guys okay with lighting? All right, I'll wait. I'll wait a second then. Does anybody know where the lights are? Well, thank you. That's all the time we have today, and appreciate you coming. Spanish interviews will be on the street outside. There we go. There we go. There's a hero to the press and beyond. As we stood together and we talked about the increase in the city of Los Angeles of just 1.7 and a decrease actually in unsheltered people on the streets of Los Angeles for the first time in years, we felt that flattening of the curve, that the investments of the last 2 years, our ability to recompress our beds and to put people into a record number, it'd be 2,400 units of permanent supportive housing, thanks to the voters and HHH this year, over 2,000 next year. We know what works. But there's still so much more that can be done, especially for those with mental health and substance use disorders. That causes so much of the trauma people experience, both those people and people who live by them in our neighborhoods, on our streets. So now more than ever, I'm excited to be standing side by side with our county partners in this journey. And en español, brevemente, just a couple seconds in Spanish too. Es emocionante estar aquí con ustedes y con el Condado de Los Ángeles para anunciar un acuerdo y plan de acción para abordar la indigencia en la ciudad de Los Ángeles. Un plan de acción el cual nos unifica para enfrentar la urgencia de este momento. Porque aunque los números nos dicen que vamos en buen camino, nunca debemos estar cómodos con nuestros vecinos, amigos, familiares y conocidos sufriendo en las calles de nuestra ciudad. Este acuerdo nos provee más oportunidades para la construcción de viviendas permanentes y temporales en las propiedades de la ciudad y el condado. Y también asegura que aquellos que tengan vivienda tengan acceso a servicios, accesos por el condado, los cuales son esenciales para que estos angelinos continúen en el camino hacia la recuperación. Esta crisis siempre ha necesitado recursos y apoyo en todos los niveles, pero ahora más que nunca tengo mucha esperanza en esta nueva colaboración entre el condado y la ciudad. Sé que juntos podremos progresar. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our legislative leader, Council President, whose work on homelessness has helped us get to where we are today, and we're so pleased to have her. Mary Martinez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. How is everyone? It's warm in here, isn't it? Or just me? It's a little warm. Well, I'm from the valley, so it's kind of usual. It's kind of normal, 106 degrees. Anyways, thank you very much for having me here this morning. Last week's homeless count numbers showed that even though the city has been building quickly with resources like Project Room Key and Home Key at our disposal, this crisis is bigger than all of that. While we were able to use unprecedented resources from the federal to state governments over the past 2 years, if the numbers of people experiencing homelessness remain virtually the same, then people are falling faster into homelessness than we can actually keep up with. And that when we keep making progress, continuing the status quo simply will not solve or end homelessness in our city. Quite frankly, we cannot afford, for the sake of all Angelenos, to the housed or unhoused, to continue on the same track. But today I'm hopeful that with this new agreement, we'll be able to reach a turning point in this crisis. Today we have come together to treat this crisis like it is, a true crisis. City leaders have always been honest with the public and Angelenos. The city simply cannot solve this crisis on our own, and the county cannot solve this crisis on their own. We shouldn't have people living in tents, waiting on the streets of our city for permanent supportive housing. And we shouldn't have people living in our streets having mental breakdowns on the side of the roads while they're waiting for mental health beds to be available. Just simply to put it to you this way, we also cannot have people fall into homelessness. We have to do more to prevent people from falling into homelessness every single day. It's on both of us, the city and the county. And the city needs to build quickly, and we have been. We will continue to break down the barriers for people experiencing homelessness, bringing people indoors at rates that we have never seen before. The homeless count last week showed that much more work needs to be done to be able to bring our neighbors inside. For me, it has been at least 1,900 interventions, either online or on their way in District 6. This is enough to serve over half of the unhoused in my district. In my district, we are leading in building housing in the San Fernando Valley. And I am grateful to my district for always willing to say yes to helping their neighbors and to solutions for the rest of the city of Los Angeles. It's not an easy thing to do because my district cannot possibly be the only district in the valley building housing. As we aim to find solutions to this crisis, we cannot continue to allow only some districts to be able to build housing to solve the rest of the city's issues. All we ask is that it's taken into consideration and that we're actually given credit for building the housing in our neighborhoods. Mr. De Leon and I can attest to that. We're building and we're continuing to build. And all we ask for is that the rest of the city do the same. For today's settlement, the work isn't done. It's not a court battle. It's about the court case giving us the actual tools to truly address this crisis. Today is a starting point. The Alliance settlement is a culmination of years of work that this council has been doing on homelessness. And now, this settlement, we are bound to work together with the county and the Board of Supervisors. I welcome this because it will be crucial to how successful we are as a city. And to be clear, all these numbers that we agreed upon today are simply a baseline, as we will be striving to pass our minimum intervention requirement of approximately 14,000 interventions. I have faith that this county will surpass their own numbers by bringing mental health, substance abuse, and detox beds online. And as long as I'm the president of the City Council, and as long as we have a willing partner in the county and the Board of Supervisors, I know that we'll be able to tackle this crisis. And this should not be the first. This should be one of the first of many agreements that if we are to treat this crisis as a crisis that it is, and that we know that we are able to solve if we work together. And before I introduce our Homeless and Poverty Chair, Kevin De Leon, I'd like to say a few words in Spanish. Hay prensa en español, ¿verdad? ¿Dónde está? Okay. El conteo de personas viviendo sin techo la semana pasada demostró que aunque la ciudad ha estado construyendo rápidamente y tenemos recursos como Project Room Key y Home Key, esta crisis es más grande que todo eso. Demostró que si continuamos haciendo lo mismo, no podremos resolver ni acabar con las personas indigentes en la calle. Pero hoy tengo esperanza y esperanza que con este acuerdo hemos llegado a un punto determinante en esta crisis. No hemos reunido para abordar como una crisis que es y lo que estamos enfrentando. No deberemos de tener personas viviendo en tiendas de campamento para que, con la esperanza que un día puedan conseguir vivienda, y tampoco deberíamos de permitir una persona experimentando crisis mental tampoco viviendo en nuestras calles. Al igual es tan importante también prevenir y evitar que las personas caigan a la calle por falta de hogar. Es la responsabilidad de ambos, de la ciudad de Los Ángeles y del condado de Los Ángeles. La ciudad necesita construir rápidamente y lo estamos haciendo. Con este acuerdo hoy, el trabajo no se termina. No se trata de una batalla en el tribunal, se trata de utilizar este caso para crear herramientas que realmente aborden esta crisis y eso comienza hoy. Este acuerdo, nosotros trabajaremos junto con el Condado de Los Ángeles y la Junta de Supervisoras. Recibo esto como una buena manera para, esencialmente, ser exitosos para resolver este problema. Y mientras que yo sea la presidenta del concilio y tengamos un socio dispuesto con el Condado de Los Ángeles, vamos a poder enfrentar esta crisis nosotros. Y esto debe ser el primero de muchos acuerdos para poder realmente acabar con esta crisis de la indigencia. And now I'd like to introduce the Homeless and Poverty Chair, Kevin De Leon.
Good morning. Muy buenos días to each and every one of you. To Senator Holly Mitchell, Chair of the LA County Board of Supervisors, to our Mayor, Eric Garcetti, to our Council President, Nuri Martinez, and also to the LA Alliance, to the plaintiffs here today, Matt Umhofer. I want to thank each and every one of you for bringing us here together. I'm pleased to be here today to see the county join the city in moving forward on a settlement agreement. However, let me underscore, and to be very clear, today is not about the settlement agreement on homelessness or giving the impression that somehow our work is complete or we are backslapping each other, uncorking the champagne bottles and giving us high fives. Today is really about recommitting to our collective responsibility to address the massive humanitarian crisis that is homelessness in Los Angeles. Now, I think that it is wonderful that we've come here today, especially Holly Mitchell and myself. Holly, me being the president pro tem, and Holly being our chair of the budget committee. And I remember Holly going on behalf of the California State Senate to Salt Lake City, to Utah, to be very specific, to analyze their housing first model and what we can do in Los Angeles. And I remember being together in Skid Row when we announced, our Senate bill that we moved forward together. Unfortunately, it was tied up in litigation by lawyers, of course. So we decided to go a different route. And we introduced it as a Senate bill and got the governor, then Jerry Brown, to sign it. And as a result, LA County specifically has received more than $700 million from that effort right there for homelessness housing for those individuals who have severe mental illnesses. And that was called Proposition number 2. So it is poetic that we come here today in your district, Holly, to be specific, at this press conference. The homeless count results that were released last week should be an echo in our ears that ring like a fire alarm. The numbers are sobering reminder that we have a tremendous work ahead of us and a long way to go. The truth is that we can only get there by bringing our collective resources together in a way that delivers housing and supports the unhoused Angelenos that need to get back on their feet and thrive. That means ensuring the individuals with mental health needs get the support of housing specialized for them that allows them to function healthy and well. It also means that individuals with substance abuse challenges get the treatment and support they need to remain clear, remain clean, and to live their lives to the fullest. We all know the devastation here today on our city streets. Crystal meth, and especially fentanyl. With fentanyl, you don't get a chance to get addicted. It's too late for that. With fentanyl, you die. And I know there's nowhere more acute in the United States of America than the deaths of fentanyl, due to fentanyl, than Skid Row in Los Angeles, downtown Los Angeles. The results, as Mayor Eric Garcetti just articulated a few moments ago, show that we have made inroads on flattening the curve. But the big challenges still exist, such as the dramatic increase in homelessness among Latinos in the city of LA. To be specific, a 20% major increase in homelessness with Latinos. And we don't know what the future holds right now with the eviction moratorium, because we have individuals who are barely holding on by their fingertips. Last thing we need is another tsunami of unhoused individuals, the majority of them being hardworking individuals, Latinos living in their cars, living on the streets or with other families. In addition, we have seen a number of unhoused individuals with serious mental illnesses and substance abuse problems nearly double. These are numbers that are absolutely unacceptable. The numbers overall prove that our hard work and investment paid off to stop the bleeding. But I think we should be very honest with each other, because it points out that the lawsuit was a major catalyst, the motivator to bring us here today, to look for a deal that's necessary before U.S. Federal Judge Dave Carter. We have a tremendous work ahead of us, especially in Skid Row, the greatest concentration of homelessness, depravity, and poverty anywhere in the United States of America. The depth of despair and the need there is like any other community in LA County. The city of LA can create the housing, and we're doing just that. But what the city doesn't have are the mental health and substantive abuse resources and the services that most of our unhoused members there need. There are simply too many people on Skid Row that can't live on their streets without the necessary resources. Matching high-need individuals with the wrong housing doesn't work. And this is exactly why the city and county must work together, or we will fail together. That's just the bottom line. Together, and only together, can we make sure that we can deliver the appropriate housing and services to give individuals and families the best chance to get a roof over their head and remain housed and live a life of fulfillment. As Mayor Eric Garcetti and Madam President Nuri Martinez just mentioned, I'll just mention a few words in Spanish as well too. Bueno, yo me siento bien honrado de estar aquí con nuestra presidenta del Condado de Supervisores, Holly Mitchell, nuestro presidente municipal, jefe de gobierno, Eric Garcetti, nuestra presidenta del Concilio de la Ciudad de Los Ángeles, Nuri Martínez, para anunciar una tregua entre la ciudad y el condado con los demandantes, la Alianza de Los Ángeles. Que quede muy claro, la ciudad y el condado de Los Ángeles es el lugar con el mayor número de indigentes, personas viviendo en las calles, en las banquetas, en los callejones, en sus coches, día tras día. Y esto nos deja una mancha de vergüenza, que quede muy claro. Una de las ciudades y condados más ricos del mundo, y tenemos la población más alta a lo largo y ancho de nuestro país, aquí en Los Ángeles. La tregua con la Alianza de Los Ángeles es un acuerdo oficial para lograr más viviendas, techos y más servicios para aquellas personas que sufren de enfermedades muy severas mentales psicológicas, esquizofrenia, bipolaridad. Necesitamos trabajar colectivamente, porque si no, habrá mucha más gente sufriendo en las calles día tras día. Por eso me da mucho gusto estar aquí con Holly Mitchell, con Eric Garcetti, con Nuri Martínez, para hacer el trabajo necesario, para evitar una ola gigantesca, tsunami de más personas en las calles y para bregar con las personas hoy día que sufren día tras día, mes tras mes, año tras año en las calles de Los Ángeles. Con eso, muchas gracias. With that, I have the honor to introduce the CEO of LA County, the woman where a lot of the responsibility on that part of the LA Alliance lawsuit agreement is going to fall on, along with our city folks, the folks who have to execute. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, what we decide legally, and I'm glad folks said it here, this was never really a legal issue. It was a political leadership issue, ultimately, at the end of the day. But it took a legal lawsuit to get us here today. But it's about execution, if in fact we're going to succeed. It's about the execution, not the bells and whistles and the ribbon cutting ceremonies, but the bells and whistles. And that's why with Fezia, Davenport, with our folks in the city and the various departments, it's going to be key in what you do to make sure we're successful in meeting the demands of the litigation that's before us today. Let's bring up the CEO of LA County, Fezia Davenport. Fezia Davenport.
Good morning or good afternoon to everyone, to Supervisor Mitchell, to Mayor Garcetti, to Council President Martinez, Councilman De Leon, and Council Matthew Umhofer. Thank you for being here with us today. I'm not going to repeat. I crossed off half of my comments because they've all been said. But I want to talk. Supervisor Mitchell talked about the terms of the settlement. We have our county counsel here this morning, Dawn Harrison. You're probably not going to get a word out of her about the legal strategy behind the scenes. The ink on this deal has just been, it's still wet. Matt and I signed it this morning. But I would like to talk to you a little bit behind the scenes, the journey that Matt Zabel and I have taken. I'm actually going to embarrass him. I promised you I would. So to come up and join me here, Matt has become my work husband. We started this journey over a year ago after I believe it was President Martinez met with Supervisor Mitchell and Supervisor Solis. And talked about a path forward and said, you know what, let's get out of the way and let's have our bureaucrats, the nice kind, let's put them in a driver's seat and see what they can do. Since September of 2021, Matt Zabel, Patty Huber, Yolanda Chavez of his team, as well as Cherie Todoroff from my team who could not be here today, we were meeting weekly, every week. And one of the things that we learned is, you know, our bosses had set the North Star for us. It wasn't about the what. More often it was about the how. And it was a learning exchange. We had questions about how come you can't do this? It's like, well, actually we can do that. We just can't do it that way. And so it really was a journey of learning, adjusting, and pivoting to figure out how we could land the plane. So I'm so appreciative. As everyone said previously, we are by no ways dropping the microphone. We don't think that this is a done deal. We know that there is more work to be done and that there are many more conversations to be had. The City of Los Angeles has been a great partner in this, and we know that we have another 87 cities in the county and our unincorporated areas that we have to address. Councilman De Leon mentioned the staggering increase in homelessness around amongst our Latino unhoused residents. We also know that for African Americans, African Americans remain about 8% of the county's population, but overwhelmingly represent those who are unhoused. So we know that we have to continue to move forward. And I'm not going to pretend that was always a love fest. Matt Zabel is the consummate diplomat. And I think when things got tough, we learned to do tough better, and we were able to get a deal done. So for that, I'm thankful. And Matt, if you wanted to share anything, if not, I will introduce our next speaker. He didn't know that I was going to ask him to speak, by the way.
But no, thank you, Fezia. I appreciate that. I know we want to get to questions, but let me just say a word on the strategy behind this deal. This agreement, the whole of this agreement is designed to be greater than the sum of its parts. And what I mean by that is we have this crisis that, as the council president and all the speakers said, can really only be solved when the city and the county are maximizing their resources. The city is designed and funded to construct housing, both interim and permanent. The county is designed and organized and funded to provide services for those individuals in that housing and to get individuals into that housing. So it only actually works if both sides are doing what they are designed to do at a maximum optimal level. And that is what this agreement binds us to do. So to that extent, it sets a standard that I hope that we can build upon as we both seek out additional funds, and as we start to turn the corner on this crisis, we can use this as a template moving forward. So thank you again, Felicia, for your professionalism, and for the board for being open to engage in this agreement. Even though it came out of a lawsuit, which was at many times very contentious, we were able to get some very positive progress out of it. So thank you very much.
And that is a great segue, and now I will release the podium and turn things over to Matthew Umhofer, counsel for the plaintiffs. Thank you.
You know, I'm reminded several years back, then Vice President Biden, when the Affordable Care Act was being signed, turned to then President Obama and said on a hot mic, "This is a big bleeping deal. Fill in the bleep." That's how I feel today. This is a big deal. Supervisor Mitchell, Mayor Garcetti, Council President Martinez, Councilman De Leon, it's an honor to be here with you today to mark this historic, and as Supervisor Mitchell said, monumental agreement. An agreement that, if we do the work that it demands of us, will put us on the path towards ending homelessness in Los Angeles. My name is Matthew Umhofer, and my firm, Spertus Landis & Umhofer, and my partner, Elizabeth Mitchell, we're the ones who caused all this ruckus. I'm a lawyer. I represent the plaintiffs in this case, and particularly the LA Alliance, a broad coalition of people experiencing homelessness, people on the edge of homelessness, people living in poverty, residents who live in areas affected, deeply affected by homelessness, property owners and small business owners. That's our coalition. Each of them affected in a different way by the human tragedy of homelessness. All of them heartbroken by the scale of the suffering and recently the sweltering that we see on the sidewalks, on the streets, on the underpasses, and in the encampments. And more than 2 years ago, this coalition came to us and said, what can we do? What can you do to turn the tide of this tragedy? And so we got to work. And it became clear to us as lawyers that nobody had ever tried anything like this before. No one in this nation had ever brought a viable lawsuit against a city or a county seeking to command a city or county to provide shelter and services to persons experiencing homelessness. But what was also clear to us was that no city, no county had ever presented a problem this serious, a collective failure this flagrant. And so we got to work. Now, our legal system is an adversarial system. We fight, and from that fight comes justice. And we knew we were in for a fight. And over the past 2 years, we fought for our clients. And yes, at times we fought against the city and the county. But all along, we've been fighting for this city and this county, and for our brothers and sisters on the streets, for the soul of this city of angels. It's been a good fight because it led to this moment, right here, right now. To the city and the county coming together to forge a new partnership and a new path. A path that will lead to housing and shelter and services for thousands of people suffering on the sidewalks of Skid Row and throughout this city. It seals our billion-dollar deal with the city by ensuring county support for that deal in the form of critical services for every one of the thousands of people who will be housed and sheltered in the coming months and years under this deal. This deal is going to multiply the number of outreach teams that are working on the streets to find solutions for unsheltered citizens. This deal is going to add critical numbers of mental health beds. But most importantly, this deal provides something that has been desperately missing on this issue for decades: real accountability. Accountability in the form of supervision for the next 5 years by a federal judge. And not just any judge, Judge Carter. A judge so famous he has a fan club. I believe the mayor's a member. Frankly, today we are all members. But more importantly, this is a judge so dedicated and devoted that he spent the better part of 2 years walking the streets of this city and this county, tirelessly laying the groundwork for the historic agreement that we are celebrating today. But Judge Carter was not alone in helping bring this about. I know special masters are having a bit of a moment right now, but there was a special master in this case, Michelle Martinez, and she's brought an incredible level of expertise and focus to this process, and actually performed the greatest feat of keeping up with Judge Carter every step of the way. Judge Andre Barat has spent countless hours helping us hammer out our agreement with the city. Judge Jay Gandhi played a crucial role in facilitating things with the county. Scott Marcus with the city attorney's office put a lot of hours on this and pushed this agreement over the line. And this deal absolutely could never have happened without CEO Matt Szabo, who brought extraordinary expertise and energy to this effort. No one has probably been more important to this deal than my partner Elizabeth Mitchell. I can't say enough about her commitment to this city and to this case. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here today, and I'm here in her stead, but she carried this entire case on her back, and I'm so deeply proud of her and our firm for what we've done here. But as we celebrate this deal, I'm thinking about the fact that today alone, maybe 5 people are going to die on the streets of this city. Today, there are 69,000 souls counting on us. Today, there are children on Skid Row struggling to scrape by. So while I'm thrilled and deeply proud of the agreement that we've reached today, I want to make it clear to our partners in the city and the county that this is the beginning and not the end. We're not going away. We're going to keep fighting for this deal. And we're going to do more. We are going to seek to expand this agreement to cities throughout the county, to make sure that cities beyond Los Angeles join in this fight, and so this city no longer has to bear the disproportionate share of this crisis. We're also launching an initiative to build partnerships with the private sector to foster innovative public-private solutions on homelessness. We are going to keep fighting for persons experiencing homelessness, fighting for all the members of this community affected by this crisis. We're going to keep fighting for the city and this county for as long as it takes. Thank you.
Thank you very much to everyone who came to participate in today's press conference. We'll open it up for questions, and I'll invite all of my colleagues to join me to be prepared to respond.
Supervisor Mitchell, I have a question for you and DCF. I can't help but be surprised that Skid Miller's not here, and also because I listened to him for months in the spring talk about how this was a Skid Row lawsuit exclusively. Could you just tell us a little bit about the journey you guys are going on to see this in a different light?
Thank you for that question. I won't speak for the lawyers. I do think that the posture of the lawsuit was filed around a geographic region, Skid Row. I think one of the things that Matt and I talked about early on, we talked about having these 4 agreements. We realized that there was a targeted universalism that was going to need to happen here. We need to figure out what we were going to do in terms of the city. But we also knew that there are implications for the other 87 cities. So let me just give you one example. Those home teams and those MDT teams, we're going to increase those in the city of Los Angeles. But we also know because they are based by region, we're going to have to do that for the other 87 cities. So for us, it did not make sense to be constrained by the legal posture of the lawsuit, knowing that we needed to do something to solve the problem, not just, or to not solve it, but to address it, not just in a city, but for the other 87 as well.
Other questions?
This is referred to as $1 billion settlement. Can you break the numbers down? Like how much does the county pay, how much does the city pay? How would this work?
So I did our county numbers. You want to go ahead with the city numbers and we'll provide the county clarity?
Sure. So here I would caution, and if you would like to add, against putting up this is a number versus a number. And the reason for that is this: when the city made its commitment to create housing based on the pit count, based on the numbers that came out last week on Thursday, there will be there's a number that will be required to build. That number will be in the 13,000 range. We put out a number initially when we made the settlement, our initial settlement, of what the all-in cost of that housing would cost, and the number that we put out was between $3 and $3.4 billion. I want to stress that is all of the funding that would support that housing from all sources. So this is not a check that the city is writing for $3 billion. It is the amount that flows through the city, that goes towards construction of interim housing, that goes towards construction of permanent housing, and subsidies for that housing. We also included in that number all of the supportive services that would need to be provided. At the time, we were only making a bilateral agreement with the plaintiffs. So without the county's support, we would have had to take that on entirely ourselves. What the county has agreed to is to play their part in support of that housing. So it would not be accurate to say the county is paying this much, the city is paying this much. It's an all-in. And it will be determined on, the final spend will be determined on when the units are established, what kind of units, what kind of services are required, how many beds the county establishes on the for substance use and mental health. So those will be worked out over the course of the agreement. So for all of those reasons, I would just caution against a number versus a number. I know that's not what you wanted to hear, but I'm just telling you the truth.
But so there's no new amount of money.
Yeah. So there absolutely is. So Supervisor Mitchell talked about the county's commitment. So the $74 million on the home and MDT teams, that's a program expansion. Those two programs exist, but we're increasing the number. We talked about the $162 million or so in permanent supportive housing. The city is going to build additional housing over and above what they were already required to do, I think in part to meet the requirements of the pit count. So they're building additional housing, and then we're putting in those additional funds to provide services, either permanent supportive housing or interim housing.
So we can't call it $1 billion deal. I've heard that.
If you use a collective number, I would say it would be a collective number that the city and the county are going to be contributing towards a $3 billion housing program over the next 5 years. I would say that.
And I think it's important to acknowledge that the new funds identified as a result of this lawsuit for new services isn't the entire picture of what the city or county have done this year or in the future through 2027 to address the issue of the unhoused. It's one tool in a expansive toolkit.
This is a question for the elected officials and I guess
Everybody.
You know, if my memory of the math is right, like we're talking about like 1,000 new beds. Like you have said before, there's like 1,250 already built or so, and you don't know exactly yet what you're going to build. You're going to put a report out, but it's going to be like 1,000 to 2,000 beds. So the sum of this is about 2,000 new interim beds or 1,000 and permanent beds, and a deal to fund those services. That's a similar dynamic that was created through AIDS, through AAA, through a bridge home, through the freeway order. Like, why did it take a lawsuit to do this when you guys did it through the goodness of your
Ask the plaintiffs.
I'll answer that, and I'm sure the plaintiffs will want to respond differently, because when we did the city one, look, I think it's a legitimate thing to say we did this because we felt, and I think we can all agree there has been a collective failure of decades. Some of us say we're doing this because we care about this, and we've cared about this even before our current job titles are there. So we actually have an alliance, as it is, of viewpoints. It'll be up to you. I'm sure there's an opinion over there of whether we would have done this or not done this much without that. I don't care. Every little bit helps. If it can convince somebody to go 10% more, 15% more, 20% more, double down, that's always a good day, and I'm less interested in the excavating of everybody than knowing that we have an aligned team.
just
With
wanted to... No, this is not a rebuttal. This is an agreement. And I want to take issue with the premise of the question. Since this lawsuit was filed, the city and the county have agreed to, in the first instance, 6,700 new beds. And now we have an agreement for 13,000 additional beds to try to get us to a point where we are offering shelter and beds and services to 60% or more of the people on the streets right now. Now, anybody can argue all they want about whether this happens with or without this lawsuit, but what we do have now, in addition to this resolution, which is far more than 1,000 beds, is supervision by a federal judge who cares deeply about this issue, who has a track record of success in Orange County, and who's going to be here for the next 5 years making sure that we make good on this agreement. And I want you, everybody here, especially the people in the media, to hold everybody up here accountable on this. Because this is absolutely critical to the success of this, is you all, including asking good questions like Ben Reskes is doing right now, that you all hold our feet to the fire on this so that this is different from anything else that Ben has just listed off. So that this moment makes a critical difference and is a turning point in our fight against homelessness.
So, Matt, just to try to boil it down, what you're saying what was lacking before was accountability, and that's what voters are getting now with the settlement?
They're getting beds and accountability. That's right. No, it has not yet. The agreement with the city has, as you know. The agreement with the county is going to be submitted to the court. We're going to hammer out a more detailed agreement. That's going to be submitted to the court. It's going to be up to Judge Carter as to whether or not he accepts this. And so we have work to do to hammer out the details of the agreement and get it before Judge Carter, which should happen within the next 30 days or so.
All right, I have one more question for the City Council President and Mr. De Leon, who both, when the city agreed to their side of this, had quite tough words for the county, to say the least, and both talked about, like, we're doing our part, they need to do theirs. Part of this deal is, I think, like 300 new beds for SUD and serious mental illness. Is that enough?
Yeah, I was tough, and I'm going to continue to be tough. I think for me, this lawsuit has always been an opportunity to address the service aspect of how to house people and the services that they're going to need. The fact that I'm finally seeing numbers like 40% of the unhoused are experiencing some sort of mental health illness or substance abuse illness is both frustrating, but at the same time refreshing to hear. Because so much of what I see and what I witness in the streets has to do with both, a combination of both, or one or the other. And so the missing link to all of this, and the frustrating part for me as someone who's leading in building housing in my district, where not one single one of my residents has ever opposed the construction of a building or a shelter, or let alone services for the unsheltered, is that we're constantly dealing with this issue of services. The city is responsible for building. And I think we're doing that. Some of us are doing more than others, but we're doing that. And the missing link has always been the services that are needed to help people rebuild their lives and get back on their feet. So that's always been the issue that I've had. So this has always been an opportunity for me to address this, whether it be through the courts or through friends or through the fact that, Phasia and Matt ended up having such a great working relationship and getting us here today. I don't care what the avenue is, as long as we end up with the services that are desperately needed by the unhoused on the streets.
Let me say this, Ben, that we all have shared values and principles, and we're all Democrats as well, too. So it's not a question of ideology. It's not a question of do we believe or do not believe unhoused folks deserve a roof over their head. This ultimately comes down to the question of leadership and execution. This is a minimum baseline. So if you say we have 300 beds, psychiatric beds for those who are severely mentally ill, is that enough? The answer is obviously no, it's not enough. I mean, Skid Row is an embarrassment for the city, for this county, for this state, and for this country. We need a lot more beds. For me, this is a minimum baseline. When someone is having a psychotic breakdown, schizophrenic, along with fentanyl, crystal meth, on the street corner, whether it be in Skid Row or right, just like last week on the corner of Eagle Rock Boulevard and Colorado Boulevard, where we had to utilize all of our LAPD resources because we had one former tenant from a tiny home village in Eagle Rock have a psychotic breakdown with a blowtorch and was about to blow up his car at the Shell gas station that individual needs help, severe psychiatric intervention. I can't call LADWP because last time I checked, they don't offer mental health services. I can't call building and safety. I can't call rec and parks. I can't call Che because Che does excellent work. But Che is not a psychiatrist, nor does he have the financial resources and the infrastructure to take someone and put him in an environment that's conducive to him or her. That's why this is going to be very, very critical for the county, and I think this is more work for us to do in terms of increasing the number of beds. Because when someone's walking down the street, whether it's down in South LA, in the Valley, or in downtown LA, or elsewhere, and you see them half naked, and you see them screaming and yelling at the top of his or her lungs, putting a roof over their head helps stabilize, but you can only go so far for that. That's why they need the experts to come in. And with the Department of Mental Health, with a $3 billion annual budget, and this is something Holly and I had discussed before too, at the state level, when we moved forward with our No Place Like Home, and the biggest opposition was the County of Los Angeles, along with the 57 other counties up in the state of California, because of the millionaire's tax, Prop 60, was it Prop 63? 63, and there was huge surplus dollars there. So we don't know if they were waiting to invest in equity funds or trying to compound it with Goldman Sachs. What are you doing with the money? Spend the money. Because if you don't spend the money, the result is folks who are suffering, whether it's innate or whether it's induced by some type of trauma, or on the streets. And the city streets of LA in particular is the psychiatric ward, the de facto psychiatric ward. So the answer is 300 beds is not enough. This is something we'll continue to negotiate and speak with the County of Los Angeles, to move that. We don't have the ability to do that because we don't have the Department of Mental Health or Public Health Department, but we need more beds, bottom line.
And I think as we've talked about the partnership between the city and the county, I think it's clear, as we've talked about, it's about resources. So we're going to have to join forces in going to the state, going to the federal government. There has been movement afoot to make changes to Prop 63 to allow more flexibility in spending. That's sometimes a challenge with ballot box budgeting. Prop 63 passed at a moment in time when there was a identified need for mental health services, and it's changed and evolved since then. And because that's a referendum, we're locked into only using the dollars in those areas. So there's a movement afoot that we should probably collaborate and support at the state level to allow our director of mental health department some flexibility in how all of the counties use their reserve Prop 63 funds to make it relevant to the unique needs of counties and cities and people experiencing mental illness today. So there's work to be done to continue to advocate for policy that empowers us to identify resources to build and expand on beds.
Why can't the county do more? If you're saying 300 isn't enough, why not more?
The county, as I said, this lawsuit is one tool in our toolkit, and the county is doing. I talked about our overall spending at Harbor UCLA. We're in the process of rebuilding that hospital. We hope to build more mental health treatment beds in the existing hospital. There are all kinds of avenues where we as a county, beyond the borders of the city of Los Angeles, are looking at what we do to provide appropriate housing to residents of LA County who need it. The governor has put forward his Care First model. There are some counties across the state who don't support it. We have to see the details of how that will work. It's about resources. It's not about lack of commitment, and it's not about strategic planning. We are at the table every day fighting to make sure that we expand access to safe, appropriate settings for people experiencing mental illness. Thank you very much. Appreciate you coming out today.